This week is a single story episode. It's an intimate history of a family, and it mingles a lot of traditional elements that I'd been discussing in the past episodes. From the particular family dynamic in Korea, the traditional funeral and burial culture, the concept of the previous life and karma, and shamanism and Buddhism in the country's spiritual matters. If you haven't followed my previous episodes, you might get a bit confused listening to this story, but I'll leave links to all the relevant episodes in the description. I personally find this story interesting precisely because it mingles all those elements, showing how these traditional beliefs and ideas form a coherent picture of the traditional spiritual worldview. It all starts with a poster's grandfather who kept and lived together with his wife and mistress in the same household. On the surface, the Menage a Trois looked friendly and trouble-free enough, but when all three of them pass away, the long-hidden pain and fracture start to appear in spiritually epic proportion. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. So here's an allegedly true story about a complicated family history that goes beyond life. As always, handpicked, translated and narrated by host, Anthony. I had two grandmas, from my father's side alone. So, I basically had three grandmas. My mom's mother, my dad's mother, and his stepmother, should I say. That was all because my grandpa kept a concubine. It would be unthinkable today, but back in the days, it wasn't entirely unusual that a man kept a mistress or even lived in the same household together with his wife and mistress. My grandpa married grandma at 18 back in the colonial time. It was of course an arranged marriage before he went off to study in Japan. Grandpa didn't really care for his wife. Tall, handsome, and from a rich family, he freely enjoyed a playboy lifestyle while in Japan by himself. I hear even one Japanese girl followed Grandpa when he came back to Korea after his study because she was so infatuated with him. For those years, Grandma saw Grandpa only very rarely when he came to visit. Though even such a rare reunion was enough to make her pregnant and give birth to my dad, Grandpa remained cold to her and didn't change after he settled in Korea either. It was when Dad turned 5 or 6 that Grandpa brought his mistress home. I'll call her Little Grandma from now on, as that's how I called her anyway. It couldn't have been a happy situation for poor Grandma, but she was ever quiet and patient by nature, and it wasn't so uncommon situation at the time either, so she quietly accepted and endured it. Fortunately, Little Grandma was a friendly and bubbly woman and treated Grandma like her older sister. And that way, the Menage a Trois ran on without too much trouble or feud for the following decades. Meanwhile, Little Grandma gave birth to 3 daughters. My grandma passed away at 70. She suffered a massive stroke 2 years prior and was bedridden, and it was Little Grandma that took care of her the whole time. I wasn't present at her death, but I hear Grandma passed away holding Little Grandma's hand. During her funeral, Little Grandma cried so much and looked so devastated that I worried if she too would not pass away soon. Now, my family clan keeps the family graveyard in the local mountain. Grandpa had already prepared 3 plots for himself and his wives years ago. Problem was, the right order for those 3 tombs would be the husband, my grandpa, on the far left, his legitimate wife, my grandma, next, and his mistress, Little Grandma, on the far right. But during Grandma's funeral, Grandpa declared that she should be buried on the far left. The middle plot should be taken by him when his time comes, because even in death, He wanted to keep his mistress next to him. My grandpa was really an old-fashioned patriarch, always stern, hard, and temperamental, but he must have really deeply loved little grandma. My family being old-fashioned and stuffy, everybody uproared for his ludicrous idea that broke the sacred family order. But Grandpa was firm, and because he was the patriarch of the family, in the end it went ahead as he wanted. On the day of the burial of Grandma, the dirt from the plot on the far left came out yellow, even though the entire region was famous for its red-hued ground. Some elderly members took it as a sign and once again argued against burying Grandma there, but Grandpa wasn't movable. When Grandpa passed a few years later, he was buried in the middle plot as he wanted. On the day of the burial, I wondered if yellow dirt would come out from his plot too, but no, what dug up was just the usual red earth. Little Grandma followed a few years later. She visited one of her daughters previous day, spent a happy day with her grandson, and peacefully passed away in her sleep that night. Because she died away from her own home, the 3-day funeral was set up in the funeral home instead at her home. Such is the rule, they say. I have no idea. As you can see, my family is really old-fashioned. Anyway, during the funeral, my brother suggested to Dad that perhaps it would be better little Grandma be cremated. Dad's reaction was fierce, and he slapped my brother hard. That was the first time he ever was violent to his children, as far as I remember. Everybody in the funeral ran over and tried to calm down the situation, but Dad was still red-hot with fury. After Grandma passed away, Dad paid even more care for little Grandma so that she didn't feel that she was neglected because Dad wasn't her son. But my brother had his own reason for his suggestion. "It's not what I say. It's what the Shaman-Monk told me. She says a disaster would strike if we buried her in the designated plot, and little Grandma herself doesn't want to be buried there," Brother said almost tearfully. I guess you'd wonder now who that Shaman-Monk is. My brother worked as a reporter to a local newspaper, and he got acquainted with this Buddhist monk through his work. She used to be a famous shaman, but chose to become a monk. Regardless, her spiritual power remained strong and often gave my brother useful tips, warned him ahead to avoid dangerous situations, or enlightened him about the future and stuffs like that. Just as one of many examples of such, for a time, my brother dated a beautiful flight attendant. He was totally infatuated with her and would do anything for her then. But the monk advised against the relationship. Apparently, in the previous life, my brother was a lady of the night, and his girlfriend was her pet cat. She abandoned the cat for a guy, and cat died sad and lonely. That tangled karma brought them together time after time in the subsequent lives, but it is doomed to end sadly, tangling the karma further and further. Of course, my brother didn't want to believe it because he was then madly in love with his girlfriend. Seeing his resistance, the monk said, "Your cat has a mole on her nose." And yep, the brother's girlfriend, indeed, had a mole on her nose. Anyway, after such numerous episodes, my brother trusted her fully, and since we all heard him talking about the monk so frequently, we knew about her and her power too. As for this occasion, my brother didn't even tell the monk about little Grandma's passing, but she nevertheless called brother to talk about little Grandma, that her spirit appeared to her, and said she didn't want to get buried in the family grave. It stirred us all a bit, but Dad was firm, And other adults in the family also said we shouldn't bend late Grandpa's will and the family tradition. The following day, it was super busy and crowded for the second day of the funeral. And the monk came by. Nobody told her where the funeral took place, but she claimed that the spirit of little grandma led her there. We heard so much about her from my brother, but it was the first time we actually see her in person. She looked 40-something and perfectly ordinary and humble. Her shaved head was so perfectly round that I was surprised that a woman could look still so beautiful with no hair. As the funeral etiquette dictated, the monk first offered incense and prayer for the little grandma, and then greeted the leader of the funeral, my dad. Dad responded politely, but I could tell he was very uncomfortable inside. The monk held his hand and said, "It's all right, sir. I understand it all," which surprisingly lowered Dad's guard. The monk then asked to talk to the direct family members only. That would be Dad, Mom, aunts, and us brothers. What monk told us was, frankly, unbelievable. First, Grandma, who passed away 6 years prior, had become the guardian deity of the family graveyard. It wasn't what she wanted, but because she was buried in the plot where the male family line should have been buried. As I mentioned, it should have been Grandpa's burial plot originally. The unusual yellow dust from the plot signified a family lineage, apparently. Now that Grandma became the guardian, even Grandpa, who had been the biggest chauvinistic patriarch in life, now had to follow Grandma's rule. After all, he had done nothing to earn Grandma's respect and love in life. Grandma never expressed her distress in life. She quietly watched her rightful husband going into his mistress's bedroom night after night, heard noises from them overnight, and even washed their soiled sheet the following morning, and kept it all under her calm facade. To hear all such detailed accounts of the most innate family history from the mouth of a total stranger felt most bizarre. Dad reacted with low, "I see," but understandably reluctant to believe it. But the bombshell was yet to come. "With all those history and unresolved emotions, should you bury the deceased in the family grave, disaster will strike along the male lines of the family. In 3 years, all your sons and husbands would fall, and you, as the patriarch of the family, may survive, but certainly not unscathed," Monk said. It would be understatement if we weren't all shocked by then. "That's not all. It will outrage your late mother. She is now the guardian that looks after the family clan, but with such uncontrollable rage, she could very well turn into an evil." It was then Dad jumped up and grabbed the monk by her collar. He didn't say anything, but his eyes were flaming anger. We all had to jump on him to stop him. "Honey, hold yourself together and listen to what she has to say. What she described so far is all true, isn't it? Shouldn't you think about the well-beings of our son?" My mom pulled Dad down to his chair with the tears. "It's all BS. Little Mom deserved to be buried in the family grave and stay next to Dad," Dad shouted. For the first time, the monk also raised her voice as a response. "But your little mother doesn't want it. She is here now, crying, worried if her grandchildren and sons-in-laws wouldn't get hurt." "What? She's here now?" Dad said. "She is. You won't play a dedicated son to her, but have you ever considered it in her shoes? She might have only showed a bright, bubbly side, but she was never truly happy. Being a mistress of a married man and having produced only 3 daughters, she never felt at home. Should she be buried in the family grave now, she would be forever bound to this family clan. She doesn't want that. She wants to find her peace now. Personally, it stirred me deeply. I always saw Grandma and Little Grandma like friendly sisters. They were always together and so intimate too. But deep inside, both of them kept so much more, so much pain. Monk then stood up and said, "Since you can't make up your mind, come, guide me to the family graveyard. I would have to see the current state of your late mother myself." Time was passing 3 in the morning, and the burial was planned in a few hours. But we had to all follow the monk, leaving confused relatives and guests behind in the funeral home. By the time we arrived, the first light of the dawn was already breaking. The monk looked around and precisely bowed to the tombs of Grandma and Grandpa, among many other tombs of the family members. "Your late mother is there," she said to Dad. "Mother? How is she?" Dad said. "She's wearing a jade-colored dress, and her hair in an updo. She has high cheekbones and small lips. Her eyes are small because her eyelids are droopy." Mother. We were all stunned as the monk described late Grandma so precisely. "You can't approach further, though. She's very upset. She's not just an ordinary spirit anymore, but a guardian deity of this mountain. And her fury takes so much more power too. Even trees and beasts of this mountain are now anxious." Mother! Dad cried out, dropping on his knees. Things that he'd been trying to deny seemed to finally hit him hard. "I'm sorry, Mother. I didn't know how much you suffered. Forgive your poor son." The monk patted Dad on the shoulder and consoled him. "Your mother doesn't want to see her son suffer more. Come, let's wrap up the funeral of your little mother first, and come back again." As we gathered ourselves to go, the monk bowed towards the tomb of Grandma, and then turned to one side and bowed one more time. There was no tomb in that direction, and Dad asked to whom she bowed. "There's a little girl here that passes words between your mother and us. She's caring for you deeply. I presume she should be your sibling?" "A sibling? But I'm the only child to my mother. I only have 3 stepsisters from my little mother," Dad said, and the monk looked confused. After all that build-up, it frankly chipped away a bit of trust for the monk, I must say. Indeed, back at the funeral and the scheduled burial now just a couple of hours away, Dad couldn't make up his mind. Then he grabbed an old relative and asked if he had a sibling that he didn't know about. The relative first looked confused, but soon remembered that Grandma gave birth to a younger sister to Dad, but she was born disabled, and Dad's grandma simply covered the newborn's face with a blanket, and the poor baby never even had a chance to see the first light of the day. Now, Dad couldn't deny the monk was right all the time. He cancelled the burial of little Grandma and sent her to the local crematorium instead. It created quite a bit of stir among relatives, but Dad was just as stubborn as Grandpa, and nobody could bend his will. Little Grandma's ash was interred in a church facility. Later, my family wanted to pay the monk in some way for her help, but she turned it down, that she was not a shaman anymore and only wanted to help the poor souls of my grandparents. Further later, my brother passed on, that little grandma appeared in Monk's dream one last time. She looked calm and said she was grateful. She was now returning to the moon and just wanted to leave her last good wishes for her children. At first I thought, the moon? What, the moon in the sky? According to the monk, little grandma was actually a heavenly maiden in her previous life. She was banished to the human world for her wrongs, but by letting herself tangled up in human relationships, was stuck in the karma. But now finally free from it all, she went back to the heaven, basically. Hearing that, my aunt said, "How very odd. My mom indeed was born in the hour of a rabbit, in the month of a rabbit, in the year of rabbit, and again passed in the hour, month, and year of a rabbit. You yourself said it's curious, didn't you, brother?" According to Chinese zodiac, time, month, and year are represented by 12 animals: rat, cow, tiger, rabbit, dragon, snake, horse, sheep, monkey, cock, dog, and pig. And among these 12 animals, rabbit is only one that has anything to do with the moon. According to traditional mythology, we say on the moon lives white rabbits. Honestly, I'm not sure how much of all these I should believe, but there's no denying that there were plenty of inexplicable mysteries in the whole anecdote. I'm only happy if my grandma, little grandma, and grandpa found their place and peace now. Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's story. I think any family has a secret of its own, or two. Maybe it's just my family, but I really don't know much about my grandparents or even my parents' life, their younger years, how they met each other. Honestly, I never saw them very happy together. So who knows what kind of emotions and hidden incidents might have been bubbled underneath the ordinary family life day to day. Were your parents and grandparents happy couples? If you enjoyed my work, please leave me the big thumbs up in a comment, and please consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't yet. If you to support me more directly, I have a Buy Me a Coffee account, the link's in the description, and there's also a super thanks option here on YouTube for a small donation. Thank you. Until next Sunday, stay safe and take care.